It was supposed to be a celebration. My son's 30th birthday. A milestone I had been quietly counting down to ever since the day I held him for the first time, 30 years ago, when his whole future seemed full of promise. I walked into his house that evening with a wrapped gift tucked under my arm, my heart beating faster than it should have. I wasn't nervous because I forgot the candles or showed up late. I was nervous because for years now, Daniel, my only child, had grown distant from me. He didn't call unless he needed something, didn't stop by unless it was convenient for him, but a father keeps hoping. That's what I told myself on the drive over. A father keeps showing up, even when his child doesn't want him to. When I stepped inside, Daniel barely looked up from the glass of whiskey he was swirling in his hand. He was surrounded by a couple of his friends, men I didn't know well, and his wife, Samantha, who sat with a smug grin as though she owned the house and the air inside it. I forced a smile, the kind you put on when you hope tonight might turn out better than the past few years. "Happy birthday, son," I said, holding out the gift. My voice cracked a little, and I hated that he could probably hear it. Daniel didn't reach for the box. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, tilted his head, and gave me a look I'll never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was contempt, cold and sharp, like I was a stranger who had walked into his living room uninvited. "You know what the best gift would be?" he asked loudly, his words slightly slurred from the whiskey. "If you disappeared from my life." The room went quiet for a second, but then Samantha burst out laughing, tilting her head back like it was the funniest joke she'd heard all year. She reached over and patted his arm, encouraging him, nodding in agreement. Finally, he said it out loud, she added with a smirk, her eyes flicking toward me like I was something unpleasant she wished would leave faster. I froze, my hand still holding the wrapped box, the ribbon dangling awkwardly from my fingers. For a moment, I felt the heat rise in my chest, the kind of burning that demands you fight back, defend yourself, demand respect. But instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I smiled. A small, tired smile. I set the gift down on the table, even though no one reached for it, and I turned toward the door. As I walked out, I heard Samantha giggle again. Daniel said something under his breath, something I couldn't catch, but the tone was mocking. Their laughter followed me into the cool evening air, nipping at the back of my neck like icy fingers. I didn't argue, I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just left. The drive home was a blur. My mind raced through 30 years of memories, moments that felt like they belonged to another lifetime. I remembered the first time Daniel scraped his knee on the sidewalk and I carried him home in my arms. I remembered the nights I stayed up late, fixing his bike, making sure it was ready for the next morning because he loved to ride before school. I remembered his graduation, when I stood in the crowd with tears in my eyes, certain that my boy was headed for greatness. And now, here I was, 58 years old, walking out of his birthday party like an unwanted guest, his cruel words echoing in my head. "If you disappeared from my life." I thought that was the end of it, that those words would be the hardest part of the night, the cut I'd carry quietly, like every other wound a father collects in silence. But 3 hours later, there was a knock on my door, a sharp, urgent pounding that jolted me from my chair. When I opened it, the police were standing there, their faces serious, their voices clipped, and the words they spoke next turned my world upside down. They said, "Mr. Carter, your son Daniel has been arrested. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 58 years old, a mechanic by trade, and a father by identity. My hands have carried the weight of engines, wrenches, and late-night repairs for most of my life. They're scarred and calloused, but every scar carries the memory of what I was working for, my son, Daniel. When Daniel's mother, Emily, passed away from cancer 22 years ago, he was only 8. I'll never forget the way he clung to me at her funeral, his little hand gripping mine so tightly I thought he'd never let go. That day, I promised myself I'd be everything for him, both father and mother. I gave up any thought of remarrying, any thought of chasing dreams beyond our little town. My life became about making sure Daniel had what he needed. I took double shifts at the shop. Sometimes I came home so exhausted I could barely stand, but when I opened the door and saw Daniel asleep on the couch with his homework spread across the table, I felt proud. I didn't have much to give, but I gave him everything I had. That's the part no one sees. When people looked at Daniel as a young man, sharp suits, quick smile, expensive car, they saw success. They saw a man with charm. What they didn't see was the foundation built on years of sacrifice, years where I chose him over myself. But somewhere along the way, something broke between us. It started small, missed phone calls, short visits that ended quickly, a tone of annoyance whenever I asked how he was doing. Then came the judgment. Daniel telling me I should have done more with my life, that I was just a man who fixed cars for a living. The words stung, but I swallowed them, convincing myself he was just trying to distance himself to step out of my shadow. The truth was, I never wanted him in my shadow. I wanted him to shine brighter than I ever could. Samantha, his wife, only widened the gap. I met her 3 years ago, and from the first moment I sensed the disdain in her eyes. She was polished, sharp, the kind of person who measured worth in dollar signs and social circles. To her, I was the old man with grease-stained clothes in a small apartment. Not good enough. Not worthy of the family she wanted to build with Daniel. Still, I tried. I showed up with flowers for her birthday. I helped them move into their new house. I even fixed their cars without charging a dime, but each gesture was met with cold politeness, never warmth. It became clear that in her eyes, my existence was a blemish on their picture-perfect life. So when Daniel invited me, hesitantly through a short phone call, to his 30th birthday dinner, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was a chance to bridge the distance. Maybe he was ready to see me, not as an embarrassment, but as a father who loved him. I picked out a gift carefully. It wasn't expensive. I couldn't afford expensive, but it was meaningful. An engraved pocket watch with the initials DC, and the words, "To my son, the man I'm proud of." It was the kind of gift that carried sentiment more than value. Something I thought might remind him that no matter how far apart we drifted, I still believed in him. The evening itself started ordinary enough. Their house smelled faintly of roasted chicken and garlic bread. The table was set neatly, Samantha's touch visible in every detail. I walked in with the gift under my arm, wearing my cleanest shirt and freshly polished shoes. I wanted to look like I belonged, even if deep down, I already sensed I didn't. Daniel's friends eyed me curiously when I stepped into the room. I gave polite nods, offered a quiet hello, but their expressions told me I was an outsider. Still, I tried to focus on the good. I tried to focus on the fact that I was here, in my son's home, part of his milestone. I told myself that whatever tension lingered between us could be softened tonight, that a birthday was a chance for healing. But under the polite chatter, I felt the undercurrent of distance. Samantha's sharp glances, Daniel's clipped responses. It was like sitting at a table where everyone else spoke a language I didn't understand. And then came the moment that shattered the thin thread of hope I'd been clinging to. When Daniel looked at me, glass of whiskey in hand, and said that the best gift I could give him was to disappear from his life, I realized just how far we had fallen. The room erupted in cruel laughter, and in that instant, every sacrifice, every late night, every missed chance at my own happiness, all of it felt invisible. I smiled. Not because I was okay, but because I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I placed the pocket watch on the table, untouched, and I left. What I didn't know was that walking away wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something far darker, something that would unfold just hours later. And when I walked out of Daniel's house that night, the air felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just the sharp bite of the cold against my skin, it was the weight pressing down on my chest. My son's laughter, his wife's mockery. They lingered in my ears long after the front door closed behind me. The pocket watch I'd placed on their table still glimmered in my mind, unopened, unwanted. That watch wasn't just a gift. It was a piece of my heart, a reminder of the father I had tried so hard to be. And now it sat there, discarded, like me. As I made my way to my car, parked awkwardly a few houses down, I caught sight of a figure across the street. It was Mrs. Helen Brooks, their neighbor. She was walking her dog, a small terrier that barked at me until she tugged its leash. She gave me a look, half sympathy, half worry. It wasn't just pity for the old man leaving his son's birthday party alone. It was something else, something uneasy. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Instead, she turned quickly, pulling her dog along, and disappeared into her house. That look stayed with me. Driving home, the silence in the car was deafening. I turned on the radio just to drown out my thoughts, but every song seemed to mock me. Love songs reminded me of Emily. Father-son anthems reminded me of the years I thought Daniel admired me. Even the commercials felt cruel, chirping about perfect families and happy gatherings. I shut the radio off and gripped the steering wheel tighter. The truth I didn't want to admit was clawing at me. Daniel didn't just dislike me, he despised me, and Samantha encouraged it. Still, even in my humiliation, my mind wouldn't stop circling around the same question. Why now? Why say it tonight? He could have ignored me, brushed me off politely, made an excuse for me not to be there. But instead, he chose to humiliate me in front of his friends, with his wife cheering him on. That wasn't just anger, that was deliberate. When I got home, I tossed my jacket onto the couch and sat in the dim light of my living room. My apartment was small, quiet, and cluttered with old photographs. Daniel's first Little League game, his graduation, the fishing trip we took when he was 10. Memories stared back at me from every wall, mocking the distance that now defined us. I replayed the scene over and over, trying to make sense of it. And then, as if a puzzle piece clicked into place, I remembered something I'd noticed earlier in the evening. Daniel's house, his car, the expensive watch he wore. The vacations he bragged about on social media. They didn't add up. His job at the insurance firm was decent, sure, but it wasn't enough to cover the lifestyle he flaunted. Not by a long shot. And suddenly, his cruel words felt less like hatred and more like a wall, something to push me away, to keep me from looking too closely. The thought unsettled me. My son, the boy I raised with sweat and sacrifice, hiding something dark enough to make him want to erase me completely. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, when I heard a commotion outside. Sirens, faint but growing louder. I walked to my window, peering through the blinds, and saw 2 patrol cars racing down the main road. My neighborhood was usually quiet at this hour. Something serious was happening. I thought again of Mrs. Brooks's look, the pity mixed with unease. Did she know something I didn't? The hours dragged by after that. I tried to distract myself, tried to convince myself I was overthinking, but the unease only grew. Every tick of the clock on my wall echoed louder, each second stretching my nerves thinner. I found myself pacing. I wrote a note in my journal, something I rarely touched anymore. If Daniel truly wants me gone, I'll give him that. But I won't stop caring. Even if he pushes me away, I'll never stop being his father. Those words felt hollow the moment I wrote them. Just past midnight, I decided to take a walk. The night air was sharp, the streets quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath my shoes. I wandered farther than usual, my mind still wrestling with the weight of rejection. And that's when I stumbled upon the sight that froze me in my tracks. The downtown bank, its parking lot swarming with flashing police lights. Officers moved quickly in and out of the building, their radios buzzing with static-filled chatter. I didn't get close. I knew better than to meddle, but I lingered on the edge of the street, watching. 2 officers passed by, speaking in hushed but urgent voices. I only caught fragments. Inside job, footage. He thought he was clever. I walked away, my heart thudding in my chest, unable to shake the chill crawling down my spine. Something told me this night was far from over. When I got back from that late-night walk, my apartment felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me with memories of the past and reminders of what I'd lost that evening. I dropped my keys onto the table, sat down heavily in my worn-out armchair, and let the silence settle in. The glow from the streetlight outside flickered against the blinds, casting jagged shadows across the room. Daniel's words repeated in my mind like a broken record. The best gift you could give me would be to disappear from my life. Each time I heard them in my head, they cut deeper, slicing through layers of patience, forgiveness, and love that had held me together for years. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had never dared to before. Was I really wanted in his life at all? The thought was unbearable, but the answer seemed clear. No, not to him, not anymore. I pulled out my old leather notebook, the one I hadn't opened in months, and flipped through the worn pages filled with scattered thoughts and short entries. My handwriting wobbled under the dim lamplight as I wrote, "If my son wants me gone, then I'll give him that. But that doesn't mean I'll stop caring. A father doesn't vanish just because he's told to. Love doesn't work that way." It wasn't resignation. It wasn't weakness. It was my decision to hold on to dignity, to refuse to beg for a place in Daniel's life where I wasn't welcome. If he wanted distance, I would step back, but I would not let his cruelty change who I was. I sat there for a while, staring at those words, when my phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't a call, it was a news alert. Breaking. Local bank robbery under investigation. Suspects believed to have inside knowledge. My stomach twisted. I thought back to the scene I'd witnessed only an hour earlier, the swarm of police cars, the flashing lights, the officers whispering about an inside job. And then, against my will, my mind connected the dots. Daniel's sudden wealth, his arrogance, the way he flaunted a lifestyle far beyond what his salary could afford. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. No, he couldn't. Not my son. He might have been cruel, he might have turned his back on me. But crime, robbery, that wasn't the boy I raised. But doubt has a way of spreading like wildfire once it sparks. The more I thought about it, the more pieces clicked into place. The expensive vacations, the luxury car, the designer clothes Samantha flaunted on social media. Their smug confidence like nothing could ever touch them. And then the memory that stung the most. Samantha's laughter when Daniel told me to disappear. The way she leaned in, nodding along, mocking me, it wasn't just cruelty. It felt like dismissal, like they were erasing me from the picture because I didn't fit into the life they were building. A life they didn't want me to question. I stood up, pacing the room, torn between denial and the gnawing suspicion that something was very, very wrong. Part of me wanted to call him, demand answers, but I could already imagine his voice, dripping with disdain, telling me I was crazy, that I was jealous, that I was just a bitter old man who didn't understand success. Another part of me wanted to march back to his house, to slam that pocket watch into his hand and tell him the truth, that I had given him everything. And if he was throwing it all away, it wasn't me he was destroying, it was himself. But in the end, I did neither. Instead, I chose silence. I chose to step back, to let the pieces fall where they would. For years, I had tried to protect him, guide him, save him from his own mistakes. That night, I realized the hardest truth a parent can ever face. Sometimes, the only thing you can do is let your child face the consequences of their choices. So I sat back down, hands trembling, and whispered into the stillness of my apartment. "You made your decision, Daniel. Now, I'll make mine. It wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. It was acceptance. I would disappear, not out of shame, but out of strength. I would walk away with my head high, no longer begging for a seat at a table where I was unwanted. I didn't know it then, but that decision, my silence, my choice to step back, would collide head-on with the truth that was about to come crashing down. Because while I was writing in my notebook and choosing to disappear, the world outside was already unraveling. And in just a few hours the police would show up at my door, not to tell me I was free of my son, but to tell me that he had shackled himself to a future neither of us could escape. It was just after 2 a.m. when the pounding on my door shook me awake. My first thought was that it was a mistake. Maybe the neighbors, maybe some drunken kid. But when I opened the door, I saw the 2 uniformed officers standing under the dim hallway light. "Mr. Carter?" the taller one asked, his tone clipped and professional. I nodded, my heart thudding painfully. "Yes?" The shorter officer glanced at his clipboard, then met my eyes. "Your son, Daniel Carter, has been arrested." For a moment, the world tilted. Arrested? The word didn't make sense. My son was arrogant, dismissive, cruel even. But arrested? I gripped the doorframe to steady myself, the chill of the wood seeping into my palm. "What? What for?" I managed, my throat dry. The taller officer cleared his throat. "Multiple counts of fraud, theft, and his involvement in an armed robbery earlier tonight. We need you to come down to the station to answer a few questions." My knees nearly buckled. The image of Daniel at his birthday table flashed in my mind, whiskey in hand, laughing at my humiliation, smug in his wealth. Suddenly, it all snapped into place. The expensive house, the luxury cars. The way Samantha looked down her nose at me as if they were untouchable. It hadn't been success, it had been crime. I followed the officers numbly, my breath clouding in the cold air as they led me to the squad car. The ride to the station was a blur of flashing lights and static from the police radio. Every mile felt heavier, as if the distance between me and the truth was shrinking, leaving me nowhere to hide. When we arrived, they guided me into a stark room with buzzing fluorescent lights. A table, 2 chairs, and a box of tissues sat in the middle, like the place had been designed for broken families to collapse in. And then I saw him. Daniel. He was sitting on the other side of the room, hands cuffed, his face pale, but his jaw still set in that stubborn way I knew too well. For the first time in years, his eyes met mine, and there was no laughter, no contempt, just fear. "Dad," he said quietly, almost a whisper. I wanted to rush to him, to wrap my arms around him, to protect him the way I had when he was little. But I couldn't move. My feet felt glued to the floor, my heart torn between love and devastation. The officer explained the charges in detail. Fraudulent accounts, embezzling funds from his company, a staged robbery gone wrong, caught on security cameras. Samantha's name surfaced too, suspected of laundering the stolen money, though she hadn't been picked up yet. Each word hit like a hammer. I glanced back at Daniel, searching for any sign of remorse. Instead, he looked down at the table, his cuffed hands trembling slightly. Finally, I spoke. "Why, Daniel, why?" He didn't answer right away. His shoulders rose and fell with a shaky breath, and when he finally looked at me, his eyes glistened. Because nothing I did was ever enough. I wanted more. I didn't want to end up like you. The words sliced through me. All those years of sacrifice, of broken hands and sleepless nights, had led to this moment. My son sitting in chains, blaming me for the emptiness inside him. I leaned closer, my voice low but steady. "You think this makes you better than me? Stealing, lying, throwing away your life? I worked myself to the bone so you wouldn't have to. And this is what you chose?" Daniel flinched, but he didn't argue. His silence said everything. The officers gave me a moment before leading him away. I watched as they pulled him to his feet, his head bowed now, his arrogance stripped away. For the first time in years he looked small again, like the boy who once clung to my hand at his mother's funeral. As the door closed behind him, I felt my chest tighten. This was the climax of every fear I'd buried, every doubt I'd ignored. My son hadn't just pushed me away out of cruelty, he had been hiding a life built on lies. And now the truth had caught him. I sat in that room long after he was gone, staring at the empty chair where he had been. I had imagined many outcomes for my relationship with Daniel, but never this. Never chains, never betrayal wrapped in police reports and court dates. And yet, as painful as it was, I couldn't deny the truth staring me in the face. He had chosen this path. And nothing I had done, or could have done, could save him from the consequences now. When I left the station that night, the streets were empty, washed in the glow of flickering streetlights. The air was bitter, but it wasn't the kind of cold you feel on your skin. It was the kind that settles inside your chest, the kind that makes every breath feel heavy. My son was behind bars, my only child. The boy I had carried on my shoulders, the boy I had cheered for at baseball games, the boy I had sacrificed every piece of my life to give a future, now wearing handcuffs and facing years in prison. I walked slowly back to my apartment, the city eerily quiet around me. The world hadn't ended, but it felt like mine had. When I got home, I sat down in my chair and stared at the pocket watch still glinting faintly in my memory. The gift he never opened. The gift that now felt like a cruel reminder of what I thought we still had. A bond, fragile but unbreakable. But that night showed me the truth. Sometimes love isn't enough to save someone from themselves. The hardest part wasn't the humiliation of his birthday, or even hearing him say he wanted me gone. The hardest part was realizing that he had chosen a path so far from the values I tried to raise him with. Honesty, hard work, dignity. All the lessons I thought I had passed down were buried under greed and shame, and yet I couldn't hate him. As much as I wanted to scream, to curse his name, to cut him out of my heart the way he had tried to cut me out of his life, I couldn't, because I was still his father. When I saw him in those cuffs, trembling but too proud to cry, I didn't see a criminal. I saw my boy, lost, broken, drowning in mistakes he couldn't undo. That's what love does to you. It refuses to die, even when everything else has burned to ashes. In the days that followed, I thought a lot about the way he had looked at me, fearful, ashamed, but also searching. Like part of him still wanted me there, even if he couldn't admit it. Maybe that's why he had pushed me so hard that night. Maybe telling me to disappear was easier for him than letting me see who he really was becoming. I'll never forget what one of the detectives said before I left the station. He looked at me, not unkindly, and said, "Sometimes, Mr. Carter, people hurt the ones closest to them because they can't face themselves." Those words have stayed with me. Daniel didn't push me away because he hated me. He pushed me away because he couldn't stand the reflection I cast, the reminder of the values he had abandoned, the life he could have had if he had chosen differently. That realization doesn't make the pain easier, but it does make it clearer. So what did I learn from all of this? I learned that being a parent doesn't end when your child grows up. It doesn't end when they say they don't want you anymore. It doesn't even end when they break your heart. A parent's love is stubborn. It holds on, even when logic tells you to let go. But I also learned that love doesn't mean saving someone from the weight of their choices. Sometimes the only gift you can give, the hardest gift, is letting them face the consequences on their own. That night, Daniel asked me to disappear from his life, and in a way, I did. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I chose silence instead of begging. I chose dignity instead of desperation, and that silence revealed everything. Now, when I sit in my apartment surrounded by pictures of better times, I don't pretend that everything is fine. It's not. My son is in prison. Our relationship may never be the same, but I hold on to one small piece of hope, that someday, when he's ready to face what he's done, he'll remember that I was there, not with judgment, not with revenge, but with love that refused to disappear. And if that day comes, when he finally looks me in the eyes and says, "Dad, I'm sorry," I'll be there, because that's what fathers do. Until then, I carry the lesson with me, and I share it with anyone willing to listen. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones carrying the heaviest secrets, and sometimes the greatest strength isn't fighting back, but walking away with your head held high. That night, my son gave me the cruelest gift, but in the end, it revealed the truth I needed to see. And that's my story. It wasn't the ending I ever wanted for my son, but it taught me something powerful. Love doesn't disappear just because someone pushes you away. Sometimes silence, dignity, and patience reveal more than anger ever could. If this story moved you, if it made you think about family, love, or the choices we make, then do me a favor, hit the like button, share this video with someone who might need to hear it, and leave a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been pushed away by someone you love, only to learn the truth later? And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the hardest goodbye can become the strongest lesson.